Where did Hollywood come up with such cool styles for a director? How did a director get the power that they've got now, and that they control the entire aspect of a movie, that they are almost a superstar themselves? Well, a lot of it comes from tonight's film, Citizen Kane. I thought I'd do something dramatic to catch your attention. But the reality is that the Steven Spielbergs, Alfred Hitchcocks, a lot of the big-name directors, George Lucas, that we know this day and age, owe a lot to Orson Welles, the director of Citizen Kane. And for one big reason, he was able to take a personality and translate it into a force that would make a movie that was his movie. And that's what we're going to be talking about here tonight. The auteur, the director. Auteur, a French word for author. Really, by the late 30s, early 40s, the idea of a director being the author of a film was starting to develop. Before, it was kind of seen as a team. Remember, we talked about vertical integration, where you would have the idea that the studio head or the owner of the studio owned and controlled everything, and then everyone worked under him. He'd hire producers and directors and writers, but they'd all be working under him and for his kind of idea. And in earlier films, maybe some of them had a little bit of control, but they were small movies. And so really we're getting into the era where you're going to see names like Orson Welles, and Alfred Hitchcock, John Ford, Michael Curtis, some of these big-name directors establish for themselves power to make a movie that is their vision. And it's really very unique here with Citizen Kane. Now let's set the tone here. If you took a moment to read in chapter 10 about Orson Welles, just in the first couple pages, you'll see there he was a young guy. Hit Broadway in his late teens, was directing plays and writing them and creating them into his early 20s there. And quickly moved into radio with the Mercury Theater and the Players. And for those of you who didn't know, that War of the Worlds was his creation along with his team, and it frightened America because on Halloween night there, and I believe was it 1938, people literally thought Martians were invading New Jersey. They got phone calls at the police stations. There were people panicking because there was no, this is a dramatization. This is only a play. Everybody was freaking out because it was done very well, as if it was a real broadcast. So Orson Welles, he created a name for himself. A lot of the plays he did were somewhat controversial. The all-black, all-African-American cast to play the role, or to play the characters in Macbeth that's set in Haiti with voodoo and so forth. I mean, that was really cutting edge for the 1930s. And it wasn't like he was mocking African Americans. He was really creating a new setting for Shakespeare to be told in. So he was a very artistic director who had a vision and the power to bring that vision about. So RKO Pictures notices this, and they're not doing too good as a studio. And they think, you know what? Let's sign this director to a deal. Now, technically, they were still working for him, but they gave him something that was unprecedented. No other director had ever had this in the history of Hollywood as a production facility, you know, the studio era that we're talking about here. They gave him a 6-picture deal with complete control, and that's unheard of. Now, sometimes directors would have the ability to guide and direct it, but they wouldn't have final say, and he was given final cut. He was given the ability to say, once it's all edited, this is my version right here. No one else can supersede me. This is the movie that we're going to put out in the theaters. So, I mean, it's a good risk, I would say. He's a young man, 24 years old. Definitely made a name for himself at Broadway, and name for himself in radio. So why not make the big jump to cinema? And so he comes up to Hollywood. His first picture that he tries to work on, well, it doesn't really work out. It's a Heart of Darkness adaptation, Joseph Conrad novel. Some of you have probably read it before. But due to technical difficulties, the war breaking out, and even his lead actors getting interned in Germany, it just wasn't going to work out. So he moves quickly to a new theme. And we have to ponder for a moment to consider, or to even think, did he know what he was getting himself into? Now, those of you who have seen Citizen Kane, hopefully by now you're watching this, you've already watched Citizen Kane. It somewhat mirrors the life of William Randolph Hearst. Any of you ever been to Hearst Castle up there on the Central Coast will know who he is. He was a newspaper mogul, controlled radio stations, probably the most powerful man when it came to media or news in America at that time. I guess the comparison could be to Rupert Murdoch, who controlled various forms of media and information. But Citizen Kane loosely is based on his lifestyle, and the person who wrote the screenplay definitely knew this, and even though there's some aspects that have been fictionalized, it was so close to the life of William Randolph Hearst that it gets Orson Welles into some trouble. So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But nonetheless, Orson Welles comes to Hollywood, has the power and control from beginning to end to make this his picture. And that's the idea of the auteur, the director who is the author. It is an Orson Welles film. Now, before this, you might have put directed by, and that's okay to say because a director gives guidance and direction in the course of the picture. But to say an Orson Welles film, that's somewhat a new phenomenon. People in Europe were struggling with this issue. You know, it's a collective medium that we're all working together for a common goal, a final picture. So how can somebody put their name on it, say it is a Steven Spielberg film? And so to this day, it's still kind of debated, is it really fair to put that on there? And I think to a certain degree, what you'll see is that, yeah, this is his vision. He's the driving force on it. He's the one that pulls together all the various team members and pulls together everybody to make this work as a whole. So what we'll talk about in the next section is a bit of how the film looks and sounds, it's revolutionary. And I believe, honestly, that's partly why we consider this the #1 picture on many different lists. And then secondly, we'll look at the controversy and see really what kind of comes out of that. So we'll talk to you in the next section.